You think getting kicked out by your own father on Thanksgiving hurts? It does not. I only found it funny. When he threw my luggage on the sidewalk and claimed this mansion now belonged to his new family, he had no idea the deed in his hand was a worthless copy. Nor did he know I had closed a $25 million deal 3 weeks ago. They want to play cruel fine. I will teach them a lesson about ownership they will never forget. My name is Alara Vance, and I had been dreaming of this driveway for 8 months. The gravel crunched under the tires of the rideshare sedan as it pulled up to the curb of the modern farmhouse in Oak Creek Estates. It was a picture of suburban perfection. Golden light spilled from the floor-to-ceiling windows, cutting through the gloom of the Seattle twilight. Inside, I knew the air would smell of sage and roasting turkey. Outside, the air tasted of wet asphalt and impending rain. I stepped out of the car and hauled my battered tactical backpack onto one shoulder. My bones ached with a fatigue that went deeper than muscle. After spending 240 days managing a high-stakes infrastructure grid in the frozen desolation of the Arctic Circle, I felt like a ghost haunting the living. I reeked of stale recycled cabin air and the phantom scent of ozone. All I wanted was a hot shower in my master bathroom and a glass of the vintage Cabernet I had saved for this specific homecoming. But the front door opened before I could even reach the porch steps. It was not a welcome committee. My father, Douglas, stood front and center. Flanking him were his wife, Linda, and her 25-year-old son, Kevin. They stood like sentinels guarding a fortress, blocking the warmth from escaping to where I stood in the cold. Douglas did not smile. His eyes were hard, scanning my worn parka and mud-caked boots with undisguised disgust. He stepped forward, effectively cutting off my path to the entry. You can turn right back around," Douglas spat out, his voice shaking slightly, perhaps from the cold, or perhaps from the adrenaline of betrayal. "You are homeless now. Don't expect to come in here. There is no room for you." I blinked, the fatigue making his words sound like a foreign language. "Excuse me." Kevin leaned against the doorframe, a smirk plastered on his face. In his hand, he swirled a crystal glass filled with a deep red liquid. "My Cabernet." He took a slow sip, his eyes mocking me. "Thanks for fixing up the place." "Sis," Kevin said, his voice dripping with unearned arrogance. "Real top-tier renovations. We are taking over from here." I looked past them. My gaze drifted to the manicured lawn I paid to maintain. There was a pile of debris near the curb. A closer look revealed familiar shapes, my clothes, my books. And there, leaning precariously against the recycling bin, was the oil painting of the coastline I had bought in Italy. The canvas was wet from the drizzle. "You threw my things in the trash," I stated. It was not a question. "I asked you a question, Douglas," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Why I used the power of attorney," Douglas declared, puffing out his chest as if he had done something noble. "I transferred the deed to Kevin. He needs the stability more than you do. Look at you. You disappear for months to do manual labor in the snow. You are clearly unstable." Linda let out a shrill laugh, clutching Douglas's arm. "Look at that bag. You look like a vagrant. Alara, we are doing you a favor. Go learn how the real world works." They saw the dirt on my boots and the fray on my jacket. They saw a failure. They completely missed the Vacheron Constantine timepiece on my wrist, a limited edition piece that cost more than the German sports car parked in the driveway behind Kevin. They saw a homeless woman, not the CEO who had just secured a contract worth $25 million. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, replacing the exhaustion. It was a clarifying sensation. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked at the painting ruining in the rain, then back at the trio enjoying the warmth of the home I bought. I smiled. It was a sharp, humorless expression. Linda flinched and looked away. "Okay," I said softly. "You want to play by the rules of ownership? Fine. Just Remember exactly what you said to me today. Get out, Douglas shouted, pointing toward the street. Go live in the streets where you belong. I turned my back on them. The November wind bit through my layers, but I barely felt it. As I walked down the driveway to hail another car, I did not feel despair. I felt the mechanical click of a clock starting in my mind. The countdown had begun. To understand the catastrophe of this evening, one must analyze the architecture of the setup 8 months prior. I am not a drifter, nor am I a construction worker. In the corporate registry, my name is listed as the founder and CEO of Vanguard Solutions, a firm specializing in offensive cybersecurity and big data architecture for government entities. The Arctic trip was not a labor gig. It was a classified contract to build a localized, unhackable server farm for a research station that required total digital silence from the outside world. The payout for completion was $25 million. Before I deployed to the ice, Douglas came to me. He sat on my Italian leather sofa, wringing his hands, playing the role of the downtrodden patriarch to perfection. Ilara, it is the track again, he had stammered, avoiding eye contact. I am in a hole. And Kevin? He just needs a little help to get his car fixed so he can look for work. We are drowning here. I analyzed his posture and his tone. It was a performance I had seen 100 times. Yet, the biological imperative to care for one's parents is a difficult code to rewrite. I decided to help, but I applied the same risk management strategies I used in business. I agreed to sign a limited power of attorney. This is specific. Dad, I told him, sliding the document across the marble island in my kitchen. It allows you to pay the utilities and property taxes from my operational account while I am off the grid. It does not authorize asset liquidation or credit lines. Do you understand? Douglas nodded vigorously, his eyes gleaming with relief. Of course. Ilara, you are a saint. I do not know what we would do without you. I fed them the necessary disinformation. I told them I was taking a high-risk logistics management job in a warehouse up north. I emphasized that the pay was low, but the room and board were free, which was why I could not send them extra cash. I needed them to believe the well was dry so they would stop asking. It was a tactical error to underestimate their greed. I assumed that if there was no money to take, they would simply maintain the status quo. However, I did not leave my assets unguarded. 2 days before my departure, I had a team install a proprietary smart home system. It was not the consumer-grade garbage you buy at a hardware store. This system ran on an independent power cell and uplinked directly to my private server via low-orbit satellite, bypassing the local internet provider entirely. Every camera, every motion sensor, and every smart lock reported to me, regardless of where I was on the planet. On the morning of my departure, I handed Douglas the spare key. I led him to the hallway outside my home office. I had installed a biometric lock on the door and placed a physical tamper seal on the frame. Listen to me carefully, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. The office and the wall safe inside are sealed. There is nothing in there for you. Do not touch that seal. Kevin was leaning against the wall, chewing gum. He looked at the high ceilings and the expensive fixtures not with gratitude, but with a predatory hunger. Don't worry, sis. Kevin scoffed. We aren't going to touch your precious paperwork. Have fun in the cold. I walked out to the taxi with a knot of unease in my stomach. Logic dictated that the limited power of attorney was safe. Emotional intuition warned me otherwise. But the contract required my absolute focus. I could not be distracted by family drama while coding a kernel-level security system in sub-zero temperatures. As the car pulled away, I opened my laptop and finalized the command script for the house monitoring system. I set a simple, ruthless variable. If any financial transaction associated with my house accounts exceeded $500, or if any unauthorized biometric attempt was made on the office door, the system would bypass standard notifications and send a crimson alert directly to my encrypted emergency email. I was giving them a roof over their heads. If they wanted to steal the shingles, I would know before the first nail was pulled. The first month passed with a deceptive tranquility. Outside my reinforced bunker, the Arctic wind howled at 60 miles per hour, but inside, the digital silence was comforting. I spent 18 hours a day writing complex encryption algorithms. The notifications from the smart home system in Seattle were mundane. The electric bill was paid. The water bill was paid. For 30 days, Douglas played the role of the responsible caretaker perfectly. I almost allowed myself to believe that my cynicism was misplaced. Then came the third month. I was deep in a coding trance when my private server pinged with a high priority alert. The timestamp read 2 in the morning, Pacific Standard Time. Alert physical force detected. Sector 4, office entry. I pulled up the live feed instantly. The night vision camera captured the hallway in grainy green and black. Kevin was there. He was sweating, his hair disheveled, jamming a large flathead screwdriver into the frame of my office door. He threw his weight against it, grunting with exertion. The biometric lock held firm, an unyielding barrier against his greed. "Open! Come on, you stupid piece of wood!" Kevin hissed, his voice captured clearly by the high-gain microphone. He kicked the door in frustration before retreating down the hall. By the fourth month, Douglas changed his tactics. He began calling the satellite phone I had provided for emergencies. He did not ask about my health. He did not ask if I was warm. So, "Ilara," Douglas said during one call, his voice crackling with static and false concern. "When exactly are you thinking of coming back? The news says the storms up there are bad. Is it possible the weather might keep you there indefinitely?" The implication hung in the air like toxic smoke. He was hoping I would get stuck. Or worse. Shortly after that call, the administrative hijacking began. I received an automated notification from the Homeowners Association. The primary contact email for the property had been updated from my secure address to kevinvancetheking@email.com. I did not intervene. I simply logged the IP address of the change. 2 weeks later, my bank flagged a hard credit inquiry. Douglas had walked into a branch and attempted to secure a home equity line of credit against my house. He tried to cash out my equity. The bank officer, thankfully diligent, rejected the application. The limited power of attorney I had signed was a shield he could not break. It explicitly forbade real estate encumbrances or major liability creation. A normal daughter would have called home and screamed. A normal person would have flown back and evicted them immediately. But I was not operating on emotion. I was operating on logic. If I stopped them now, it was just a family dispute. I needed them to cross the line from bad manners to grand larceny. I needed to give them enough rope to hang themselves legally. I hired a private investigator in Seattle named Marcus. I wired him $5,000 as a retainer to watch the house from the street. Marcus was efficient. His first report arrived 3 days later, attached with high-resolution photographs. "You are not going to like this. Ms. Vance," Marcus told me over an encrypted voice line. "They rented a moving truck yesterday. They are moving your furniture out. Destination is a cheap storage unit in Tacoma, and they are hosting parties. Big ones. It looks like a frat house down there." I looked at the photos. My Italian leather sofa was gone. In its place were cheap plastic folding chairs and red party cups scattered across my hardwood floors. The climax of their audacity arrived in a notification from my bank's legal department. It was a transaction alert for $2,000. The recipient was a law firm in downtown Seattle, a firm notorious for handling shady estate disputes. Douglas was not just trying to borrow against the house anymore. He was paying a lawyer to find a loophole to transfer the deed entirely. He was trying to steal the property out from under me while he thought I was frozen in the ice. I stared at the screen, my breath clouding in the frigid air of the server room. They were not just bad family members. They were criminals in the making. And I had every byte of data I needed to destroy them. I finished the Arctic integration 3 weeks ahead of schedule. The client was ecstatic. and the final wire transfer hit my offshore holding account on a Tuesday morning. The balance read $25 million. It was enough money to disappear to a private island for the rest of my life. But I had unfinished business in Seattle. I did not go home immediately. Instead, I checked into the presidential suite at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle, a mere 30-minute drive from my house in Oak Creek Estates. The suite became my war room. I was not just a daughter returning from a trip. I was a CEO conducting a hostile takeover of my own life. I summoned Arthur Harland, my personal attorney and a specialist in high-asset trust litigation. Harland was a man who viewed the law not as a shield, but as a serrated blade. He sat across from me at the mahogany dining table in my suite, a stack of documents spread out between us. Ilara, these people are not just greedy, Harland said, adjusting his glasses as he examined a photocopy of a deed. They are recklessly stupid. Look at this signature on the expanded power of attorney modification. I looked. It was a shaky, pathetic imitation of my handwriting. It looks like a child trying to copy a masterpiece. I said, disgusted. Exactly, Harland replied. They found a crooked notary, a man named Henderson who lost his license twice for fraud, to notarize this forgery. They used this fake document to transfer the title of your property to a shell company called KV Holdings LLC, Kevin Vance Holdings, I assume. I laughed, a dry, sharp sound, subtle. It gets worse. Harland continued, tapping a listing on his tablet. They put the house on the market 4 days ago. They listed it for $1.5 million. That is nearly $1 million under market value. They are trying to liquidate the asset for quick cash before you return. They want to take the money and run. I felt a cold calculation take over my mind. They were selling my sanctuary for pennies on the dollar. But the true breaking point came when I reviewed the archived security footage from the previous week. I projected the video onto the large television in the suite. The timestamp showed it was Tuesday afternoon. Linda was in the living room. She was holding a blue porcelain vase. It was the last birthday gift my mother gave me before she died. A piece I had explicitly told Douglas to protect. On the screen, Linda sneered at the delicate china. This trash. It makes my house look ugly, Linda said to the empty room. She raised her hand and smashed the vase against the fireplace hearth. It shattered into 1,000 irreparable shards. She laughed, kicked the pieces under the rug, and poured herself a drink. I paused the video. The silence in the hotel suite was heavy. That vase was not property. It was memory. By destroying it, Linda had forfeited her right to mercy. I did not just want the house back. I wanted to annihilate their financial future and their social standing. Harland, I said, turning away from the screen. Do not stop the sale yet. Not publicly. Harland raised an eyebrow. You want to let them proceed. I want you to file a lis pendens immediately, I instructed. File a notice of pendency of action with the county recorder. It will freeze the title so they cannot actually close a sale. But do not serve Douglas the papers yet. Let the public record show the dispute, but keep them in the dark. You want to ambush them. Harland realized, a faint smile touching his lips. Thanksgiving is in 2 days, I said, staring at the frozen image of Linda on the screen. They are planning a victory party. They think they have won. I want them to invite everyone they know. I want an audience when their world collapses. It will be a spectacle, Harland warned. It will be an education, I corrected him. Prepare the lawsuit. Fraud, theft, forgery, and emotional distress. I want the police on standby. We strike when the turkey is on the table. I washed the homelessness off my skin in the marble shower of the presidential suite at the Fairmont. The grime of the Arctic and the stench of travel were replaced by the scent of bergamot and expensive silk. I stood before the full-length mirror, adjusting the cuffs of a tailored blazer that cost $4,000. The woman who had stood shivering in the driveway an hour ago was gone. In her place was the CEO who commanded armies of data. I sat in the velvet armchair and propped my iPad on the mahogany table. Marcus, my private investigator, had outdone himself. He had tapped into the smart home cameras I installed and supplemented them with a few well-placed feeds of his own. The video quality was crystal clear. I had a front row seat to the circus performing in the home I paid for. The living room was crowded. Douglas stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of champagne as if he were a feudal lord addressing his subjects. He was wearing a velvet smoking jacket I had never seen before, bought with my money. No doubt. It takes vision. Douglas was saying to my Uncle Bob, puffing out his chest. I saw the market shifting early. I made some aggressive moves in the stock market. Now we have the estate free and clear. It is all about smart leverage. I took a sip of a 1996 vintage Cabernet. Smart leverage, I whispered to the empty hotel room. The only leverage Douglas understood was emotional blackmail. The camera angle switched to the dining area. Kevin was cornering a younger cousin near the punch bowl. He looked manic, his eyes darting around the room as he spoke too fast. Yeah, we are flipping the house, Kevin bragged, spilling a little of his drink. I need the liquidity for my new startup. Disruptive technology. You know, it is going to be huge. We are talking next level innovation. I almost laughed. The only thing Kevin was disrupting was the peace at the blackjack tables in Las Vegas. He was not selling my house for a startup. He was selling it to pay off a loan shark before his kneecaps got broken. But the sight that made the temperature in my veins drop to absolute zero was Linda. She was fluttering between guests, accepting compliments with false modesty. Around her neck hung a double strand of South Sea pearls. My grandmother's pearls. They had been locked in the wall safe inside the sealed office. Linda had hired a locksmith to drill it open. Oh, this old thing. Linda laughed, touching the gems with her greasy fingers. Douglas bought it for me last week. He spoils me. So much. He knows I love the classics. You guys are doing so well, a neighbor gushed. Where is Alara? Is she here? Douglas waved a hand dismissively. Oh, she is wandering. She prefers the nomadic life. She is a bit lost. Sad to say. We tried to help her, but you know how she is. I watched them erase me from my own life. They were feasting on my turkey, drinking my wine, and wearing my heirlooms, all while painting me as a failure. It was a masterclass in delusion. I picked up my phone. It was time to prick the balloon. I typed a single text message to Douglas. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you like the gift I am sending. On the iPad screen, I watched Douglas's phone light up in his pocket. He pulled it out, squinted at the text, and let out a snort of derision. He nudged Linda and shoved the screen in her face. Look at this, Douglas chuckled, shaking his head. She is trying to ruin the mood. Pathetic. She is probably sitting in a diner somewhere crying over a burger. Ignore her, Linda said, popping a canapé into her mouth. She is just jealous because she has nothing. They clinked their glasses, basking in their stolen glory. They had absolutely no idea that the gift was not a fruit basket. It was a convoy of 3 black SUVs containing the county sheriff, a team of deputies, and a court order for immediate arrest and asset seizure. The sirens were already wailing in the distance, a symphony composed just for them. 30 minutes after I sent the text, the street outside was transformed into a stage for my retribution. A convoy of 3 black vehicles pulled up to the curb with military precision. Leading the formation was a heavy-duty sheriff's department interceptor. Behind it was my rented luxury sedan, and bringing up the rear was another unmarked police unit. The flashing lights were off, but the presence of the law was unmistakable. I stepped out of the back seat. The night air was crisp, but my adrenaline kept me warm. Arthur Harland stepped out beside me, clutching a leather briefcase that contained the destruction of my father's life. Flanking us were 2 uniformed officers, each standing over 6 feet tall with grim expressions and hands resting near their belts. We walked up the driveway in a phalanx. I pressed the doorbell. The electronic chime echoed inside, slicing through the thumping bass of the music and the raucous laughter of the party. The noise inside cut out abruptly, replaced by confused murmurs. Heavy footsteps approached the door. Kevin swung the door open. He was holding a half-eaten turkey leg, his face flushed with alcohol. The color drained from his skin instantly when he saw the badges shining under the porch light. He swallowed hard, trying to block the doorway with his slender frame. "What is there a problem?" "Officers," Kevin stammered, his voice cracking. We are having a private party here. You can't just—" I did not wait for him to finish his sentence. I stepped forward, brushing past Kevin as if he were nothing more than a cobweb. I walked straight into the living room, Harland and the officers close behind me. My heels clicked rhythmically on the hardwood floor, a sound that commanded attention. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from celebration to terror. 20 pairs of eyes turned to me. The room fell into a silence so deep I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Douglas pushed his way through the crowd of guests near the fireplace. His face turned a deep, violent shade of red when he saw me standing there in my designer suit. "You," Douglas roared, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "I told you to get out. I told you to go live on the street. What is this?" "You bring the cops to scare me. Get out of my house." Harland did not speak immediately. He walked to the long dining table, which was groaning under the weight of the feast. With a calm, deliberate motion, he pushed aside a bowl of cranberry sauce and dropped a 3-inch thick legal binder right next to the roasted turkey. The heavy thud reverberated through the room, making the silverware rattle. "Mr. Douglas Vance, Mr. Kevin Vance, and Mrs. Linda Vance," Harland announced, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "You are currently being detained under suspicion of grand larceny, wire fraud, federal forgery of legal documents, and criminal trespass." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. My aunt dropped her fork, the metal clattering loudly against her plate. People began to shuffle backward, creating a wide circle of empty space around my father and his new family. No one wanted to be standing next to a criminal suspect. Douglas did not crumble. Instead, he doubled down on his delusion. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and whipped out a folded piece of paper, the forged deed. He waved it in the air like a flag of war. "This is a lie," Douglas screamed, spit flying from his lips. "This is my house. Look, I have the papers. It is legal. I own this." He turned to the police officers, his eyes wide and frantic. "She is the intruder. Arrest her. She is trying to frame me." "Officer, hold on a second," I said, raising my hand. The deputy paused, his handcuffs hovering halfway to his belt. "They like to put on a show for their friends. I think it is only fair we finish the performance before you take them away." I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and tapped the screen to cast the display to the massive 85-inch television mounted above the fireplace. The image of the Thanksgiving football game vanished. It was replaced by a high-definition video feed dated 3 weeks ago. The room fell into a stunned silence. On the screen, Douglas was sitting at the very dining table where the guests were currently eating. He was surrounded by scraps of paper. He held a pen with intense concentration, tracing a signature over and over again on a backlight pad. "No, the loop on the V is too wide," the digital Douglas muttered, his voice amplified by the surround sound speakers. "I need to get it perfect or the bank will know." The video cut to a new scene. It was Kevin pacing the living room, his phone pressed to his ear. "Listen, Henderson, you get your $10,000 when the sale closes," Kevin was saying on the screen, his voice dripping with conspiracy. "Just stamp the damn form. She is stuck in the Arctic. She will never know." "Lies!" Linda shrieked. She lunged toward the television, her eyes wild, her hands clawing at the air as if she could physically rip the pixels apart. "Turn it off. It is fake. Turn it off." She did not make it 2 steps. A female officer who had entered silently with the sheriff, stepped into her path and shoved her back with a firm, practiced motion. Linda stumbled and fell onto the sofa, gasping for air, her pearls rattling against the cushions. I swiped the screen on my phone again. The video was replaced by a spreadsheet of bank transactions and official tax records. I pointed to the rows of data projected above the mantelpiece. "You told everyone here that you bought this house with your investment earnings," I said, walking slowly toward Douglas. "But here are the records: property taxes, homeowner's insurance, maintenance fees. Every single penny came from my account. The account you were supposed to use for utilities." I took another step closer. He smelled of fear and cheap cologne. "So tell me, Dad," I asked, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly low volume that carried across the silent room. "How exactly did you buy a $2 million home? Did you use the $50,000 in gambling debt you are currently hiding from the loan sharks in Las Vegas?" A ripple of whispers broke out among the guests. "50,000, a woman whispered loudly. "I thought he said he made a killing in tech stocks." Kevin was shaking now. He looked from the TV to his father, then to me. He looked like a cornered rat, realizing the trap had already snapped shut. But the papers," Kevin stammered, holding on to the doorframe for support. "The deed is signed. It is filed. You can't undo it. It is legal property now." Arthur Harland stepped forward, adjusting his tie with the calmness of an executioner. He looked at Kevin with the pity one might show a slow child. "Actually, Mr. Vance, that is incorrect," Harland said smoothly. "In the eyes of the law, fraud vitiates all contracts. Any transaction based on a forged document is void ab initio. That means it is invalid from the start. It never happened." Harland paused, letting the words sink in. "Furthermore, Mr. Henderson, your notary, was arrested at his office this morning. He has already confessed to accepting a bribe to notarize a forged signature. He gave us everything." The color drained from Douglas's face. It was as if his skeleton had suddenly dissolved. He collapsed into the nearest chair, the forged deed slipping from his limp fingers and fluttering to the floor. The arrogance was gone. The bravado was gone. All that was left was a small, defeated old man. I stood over him. I did not feel pity. I felt a cold sense of completion. "I gave you a choice," I told him, my voice steady. "When I stood at that door this afternoon, all you had to do was let me in. If you had just offered me a seat and a plate of turkey, I might have forgiven the money. I might have let you stay." I leaned down so only he could hear me clearly. "But you didn't," I whispered. "You chose to throw me away like trash. So now, I am taking out the garbage." The sheriff stepped into the center of the room, his voice booming like a cannon shot. "All individuals not named on this warrant need to vacate the premises immediately. This is now an active crime scene." The reaction was instantaneous and almost comical in its speed. The friends, neighbors, and distant relatives who had been drinking my wine and praising Douglas's business acumen only moments ago evaporated. They did not say goodbye. They did not offer legal assistance. My Uncle Bob, who had been toasting to family loyalty 5 minutes prior, practically sprinted for the back door, knocking over a chair in his haste. Within 60 seconds, the house was empty, save for the police, the lawyers, and the 3 people who had tried to ruin me. The silence that followed was broken by the dry, mechanical sound of the sheriff reading the warrant. "Douglas Vance, Kevin Vance, you are under arrest for grand larceny in the 1st degree, forgery in the 2nd degree, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The deputies moved in. The click of the handcuffs locking around Douglas's wrists was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was louder than the music had been. Linda let out a wail that sounded like a dying animal. She began clawing frantically at her neck, trying to remove the pearl necklace she had stolen from my safe. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could not find the clasp. I am giving it back, Linda screamed, her eyes bulging with panic. Look, I am taking it off. I didn't know. He told me it was a gift. I don't want it. She yanked hard on the delicate strand. The string snapped. Dozens of South Sea pearls, each worth more than $1,000, cascaded onto the hardwood floor. They bounced and rolled in every direction, clicking against the wood like hail. Linda fell to her knees, scrambling to pick them up, but an officer pulled her back to her feet. Kevin, meanwhile, was hyperventilating. As the deputy spun him around to cuff him, his facade of the arrogant entrepreneur shattered completely. He looked at the police, then at his father, and his survival instinct kicked in ugly and raw. It was him, Kevin shouted, jerking his head toward Douglas. It was all his idea. He made me sign the papers. I didn't know it was illegal. I just wanted a place to stay. He is the one with the gambling debt. Arrest him. Not me. Douglas froze. He turned his head slowly to look at his son. The betrayal in his eyes was absolute. He had stolen for Kevin, lied for Kevin, and risked prison for Kevin. And in the first second of real pressure, Kevin had thrown him to the wolves. Kevin, Douglas whispered, his voice broken. I did this for you. I stood by the fireplace, watching the scene unfold with the detachment of a theater critic watching a tragedy. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I simply felt that the script was playing out exactly as it should. Officer, I said, my voice cutting through Linda's sobbing. Before you take Mrs. Vance out, please check her handbag, the oversized beige one on the chair. Linda froze. No, that is personal property. The deputy ignored her protest. He picked up the bag and upended it onto the dining table. Amidst the lipstick and tissues, 3 of my vintage wristwatches and a diamond tennis bracelet tumbled out. She had been looting the house during the party, stuffing her pockets with anything shiny she could find. Add possession of stolen property to the list, the sheriff noted dryly. As they began to drag them toward the door, Arthur Harland stepped into Douglas's path. One final detail. Mr. Vance, Harland said, checking his notes. Because the transfer of the deed was fraudulent, the house remains Alara's property. However, the $50,000 loan you took out from the loan sharks, that was a personal contract. The collateral, this house was never yours to pledge, so you are now personally liable for the full amount. I imagine your creditors will be very interested to hear you are in custody. Douglas went limp, sagging against the deputy holding him. He knew exactly what those creditors would do to him, even in a cell. I walked over to Kevin. He was weeping now, snot running down his face, begging the officers to listen to him. I leaned in close, catching his eye. You said you wanted stability. Kevin, I said, a faint smile touching my lips. You said the house was about giving you a stable future. Well, congratulations. The state penitentiary is very stable. You will have a roof over your head for the next 20 years. Kevin stared at me with pure horror as the deputies shoved him out into the cold night air. I watched the door close, shutting out the noise of the sirens, leaving me in the beautiful, heavy silence of my victory. The red and blue strobe lights finally stopped bouncing off the living room walls as the police cruisers disappeared down the street. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on my ears like deep water. For the first time in hours, the house was still. It was just me and the wreckage of a Thanksgiving dinner that was never mine to begin with. I walked through the living room, my heels clicking on the hardwood. The place looked like a war zone disguised as a party. There were half-empty wine glasses on the mantelpiece and plates of congealing food balanced on the arms of the furniture. I looked down at the floor near the entryway. There were deep, jagged scratches in the oak finish, likely caused by them dragging my heavy furniture out to make room for their cheap replacements. I felt a pang of anger, sharp and specific. I had laid those floorboards myself 3 years ago, measuring every angle with obsessive care. They had ruined it in 3 weeks. Arthur Harland snapped his briefcase shut. the sound echoing in the empty room. He looked at me, his expression unreadable behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Ilara," Harland said softly, "I need to know how you want to proceed from here. In cases involving immediate family, the victims often get cold feet once the adrenaline fades. The district attorney will want to know if you are open to a plea deal to reduce their sentences. Maybe probation instead of prison time." I stopped walking and looked at the empty spot where my favorite painting used to hang. I thought about Douglas screaming at me in the driveway. I thought about Kevin mocking my clothes. I thought about Linda smashing my mother's vase just to hear the sound of it breaking. "No deals," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I want you to push for the maximum penalty on every single count. Grand larceny, fraud, forgery. Bury them under the penal code." Harland raised an eyebrow. "That will destroy them. Ilara. There is no coming back from a federal conviction like this. They will lose everything. They lost everything the moment they decided I was disposable." I replied, turning to face him, "I do not have a family named Vance anymore. Treat them like strangers who broke into my house, because that is exactly what they are." Harland nodded, a look of grim respect on his face. He excused himself to file the necessary motions. As soon as he left, I pulled out my phone. I did not call a therapist or a friend. I called a high-end emergency cleaning service that specialized in crime scene and disaster cleanup. "I need a crew at my house in Oak Creek Estates immediately." I told the dispatcher, "I want everything that does not belong to me removed. Clothes, toiletries, cheap furniture, everything. If it is not on the inventory list I am sending you, throw it in the trash. I want this place sterilized before sunrise." While I waited for the cleaners, I walked to the study. The police had removed the evidence tape. I knelt before the wall, safe. The locksmith I had hired earlier in the day had repaired the damage Linda caused. I keyed in the code and the heavy door swung open. Inside, tucked in the back, was a small, silver-framed photograph. It was an old picture of my mother, laughing on a beach in Oregon. It was the only thing of real value in the house, and miraculously, Kevin had been too focused on the jewelry to notice it. I pulled it out and held it to my chest, letting out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. My secure phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the moment. It was my financial manager in Zurich, Ms. Vance. The voice on the other end said, "I am calling to confirm that the transfer is complete. The $25 million from the Arctic contract has officially cleared. Your liquidity is 100%. We are ready for your next investment allocation." I looked at the number on the screen, then at the empty, quiet house around me. $25 million. It was an astronomical sum. It was a fortress of numbers that ensured I would never be vulnerable again. I realized then that this money was not just currency, it was a shield. It was the only thing in the world that had not lied to me or betrayed me. I hung up the phone and walked to the window. The cleaning crew's van was pulling into the driveway. I had expected to feel a rush of euphoria, a high of triumphant vindication, but as I stood there, watching the headlights sweep across the lawn, I did not feel joy. The thrill of the takedown had evaporated, leaving behind something far more valuable. I felt peace. I realized that revenge is not about happiness. Happiness is warm and messy. Revenge is cold, clinical, and precise. It brings order to chaos. I had balanced the ledger. The debt was paid. And in the silence of my reclaimed home, that order was worth more than all the gold in the world. The morning sun rose over Oak Creek Estates with a piercing, clinical brightness that exposed every flaw in the landscape. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room, a steaming mug of black coffee in my hand, looking out at the backyard. The garden, which had been a lush sanctuary of hydrangeas and Japanese maples before I left, was now a brown, withered graveyard. They had not watered a single plant in 8 months. It was a perfect reflection of how they had treated our relationship. They took the shelter, but they let the life die. A massive box truck rumbled up the driveway, breaking the morning silence. It was a local charity collection service I had contacted at dawn. I opened the front door and directed the movers with precise hand gestures. Take the sofas, the dining table, the rugs, and the beds. I instructed them calmly. Take everything that is not nailed down. I watched as they hauled out the furniture my father and his family had lounged on. I did not want to sit where they had sat. I did not want to eat from the table where they had plotted to steal from me. I was purging the house of their DNA. I would buy everything new. I would fill this space with things that had never known their touch. My phone buzzed against the marble kitchen island. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID read County Detention Center. It was Douglas. He was using his one allotted phone call. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to let it ring out. But curiosity, cold and sharp, won over. I slid my finger across the screen and held the phone to my ear. I did not speak. I simply listened. On the other end, I could hear the background noise of a jail block shouting, metal clanging on metal, and the heavy, ragged breathing of a man who was hyperventilating. Ilara. Douglas's voice cracked, sounding smaller and older than I had ever heard it. Ilara, I am sorry. I was wrong. Please, listen to me. Please, drop the lawsuit. I am old. I cannot handle prison. I will die in here. His voice dissolved into a pathetic sob. He was not crying because he hurt me. He was crying because he was caught. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. You told me to go live in the streets, I said, my voice as flat and smooth as a frozen lake. You said there was no room for me. Well, now I am living very well in my home. And you, enjoy your new roof. Ilara, wait, don't. I ended the call. I immediately blocked the number of the detention center. Then, I blocked the numbers of the public defenders who had been trying to contact me all morning. I severed the digital connection as easily as cutting a thread. I walked out onto the front porch and stood in the exact spot where Douglas had thrown my luggage onto the pavement less than 24 hours ago. The air was biting cold, typical for November in Seattle, but for the first time in my life, it didn't make me shiver. It felt crisp. It felt free. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The balance stared back at me $25 million. It was an amount of money that meant I never had to tolerate disrespect ever again. I navigated to the transfer section and typed in the name of a local nonprofit organization that provided shelter and education for homeless teenagers. I typed in the amount $100,000. It was a final ironic salute to my father's curse. He had wished homelessness upon me, so I would use my fortune to save others from that very fate. I pressed confirm. The transaction was instant. I turned around and walked back into my empty, quiet house. I gripped the heavy handle of the front door and swung it shut. The slam echoed through the high ceilings with a finality that shook the walls. I turned the deadbolt. The sharp, metallic click was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a toxic chapter closing forever. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.